Movie rundown here. Today I'm going to show a 2009 American science fiction psychological thriller film called The Fourth Kind. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. In late 2000, psychologist Abigail Tyler visits her friend, Drabel Campos, after the death of her husband, Will. She tells Campos that she's been having a hard time since Will died, and her children, Ronnie and Ashley, are having a hard time coping. Her daughter Ashley has lost her sight due to the extreme trauma from her father's death. Abby lets Campos place her under hypnosis to help her remember the face of the man who killed her husband. In a matter of minutes, Abby falls into a form of trance, and Campos helps her retrace back to the night of August 2nd. While in trance, Abby recalls making love with her husband. They fall asleep, and then Abby is woken up by the sound of a knife digging its way to her husband's chest. The faceless intruder stabs Will several more times, spilling the blood all over their sheets. Meanwhile, in Campos' office, Abby is screaming and crying as she recalls the event in her mind. He quickly pulls her back to reality and she composes herself. Campos advises her to take some rest, but Abby refuses and tells him that she's going to finish Will's research no matter what. Abby makes her way back to her hometown in Nome, Alaska. She goes straight to work with her first patient, Scott. She soon learns that Scott, along with another patient, Tommy, as well as a third patient, are all experiencing the same phenomenon. They wake up in the middle of the night and see a white owl looking at them. At home, Abby listens to Will's previous recordings of the same phenomenon. The next day, Abby records a hypnotherapy session with one of her patients, Tommy. She helps Tommy recall the events from last night when he saw the owl again. Tommy says that the owl disappeared and it's been replaced by something sinister. He tries to name the events taking place in his mind, but fear overtakes his heart. While in trance, Tommy screams and panics, toppling over a lamp beside the couch. Abby immediately stops the session, reminding him that it's only a memory, but he insists that it's real and immediately leaves. Later that night, the police receive a call from Tommy's wife in distress, and 2 gunshots are heard in the background. The police arrive and find Tommy in hysterics, holding a gun with his own family hostage. He calls the sheriff and demands to talk to Abby, firing 2 more shots at the window. The sheriff calls Abby, who then quickly drives to her patient's house. Abby takes the phone and talks to Tommy. Tommy apologizes but tells her that he has no choice. She tells him that he has a choice and put down her gun. Tommy is now crying, telling her that if she saw what he did, she would understand. Abby begs him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. She promises him that they would try to work it out, but he finally loses his grip. Tommy turns his wife around, tells her that he loves her, and then shoots her in the head. 2 more shots erupt from the house, killing both of his children, and then he turns the gun at his head and kills himself. The police run to the house, but it's too late. The family is now dead. The next morning, Abby finds Campos in her office. He came to check up on her and keep an eye on her since Tommy's incident. Abby then hands the tape recorder to her system to transcribe. In her office, she meets up with Scott, who is now there with his wife. Hearing what happened with Tommy, they insist Abby conduct a hypnotherapy session on Scott. Hesitant, Abby agrees on one condition, that Campos accompanies the session. They turn on the camera to record, and in a matter of seconds, Abby puts Scott into a trance. He describes the owl in his mind, and then his face contorts into horror. As he sees the images in his mind, he convulses on the couch, his mouth gurgling, but he manages to mumble out a few incoherent phrases. Abby takes him out of trance, and Scott quickly gets up to vomit on one corner of the room. After he calms down, he tells Abby and Campos the visions he had in his mind of creatures who used to visit him a lot when he was little. It was difficult to describe because you had to be there to see and feel it, but he tells her that now he understands why Tommy did what he did. Abby dismisses their session for the day and turns to Campos to tell him her alien abduction theory. Campos scoffs at the idea and remains pragmatic. Their conversation is then cut short by Abby's assistant, who tells them frantically to listen to one of his tapes. Abby turns on the tape and listens to herself dictate observations from Will's research. A few moments later, the tape goes silent, and then the sound of a door opening. Within a few seconds, ear-splitting screams erupt from the tape, and Abby's voice paired with another warped voice speaking in unknown language. Abby turns off the tape and denies that it was her. Back home, Abby listens to the tape, trying to figure out what had happened to her. According to the tape, she was sleeping when her door opened and something or someone tried to take her, but she fought it. She spotted what looked like a skin reaction forming at her left shoulder and saw the scratches on the floor further supporting her struggle. She listens to the tape over and over again, unable to identify the second voice. She then calls Drasmi, an expert of dead languages, for help. Drasmi wastes no time and takes the next flight to Nome. He examines the tape and concludes it to be part of the Sumerian language. He's able to decode at least 3 of the phrases: our creation, examine, and ruin or destroy. He supports a alien abduction theory and adds that there is a lot of evidence from Sumerian history that can support this. Tracampos remains skeptical and challenges their theory, but once again their debate is cut short by a phone call from Cindy, Scott's wife, asking them to come over as soon as possible. The group travels to the residence and finds Scott in a hysterical fit on his bed. He begs Abby to do another hypnotherapy session so that he could finally get the events from last night out of his head. Tricampo sets up the camera to record and Abby begins the session. As soon as the session starts, Scott sits up on the bed, his whole body rigid, his mouth open and screaming, and his eyes bulging out in terror. His entire body shakes as he levitates off the bed. The group backs up as an unknown voice erupts from Scott's mouth. It manages to get out several phrases, warning Abby to respond and enter study before his body collapses back into the bed. Back at the Tyler residence, Abby packs a bag for her family as they leave for North Carolina, but the police soon arrive with the sheriff. The sheriff demands to know how Scott broke his back, but as Abby tries to explain what they saw, the more the sheriff hardened his stand. Luckily, Dracampos arrives to back up what happened and manages to convince the sheriff to place Abby on temporary house arrest. He reluctantly agrees and assigns a police officer to guard outside the house. He gives one last threat to Abby and leaves to investigate. Later that night, the police officer wakes up from his post in his car and gets out to investigate the Tyler house. The camera from his car manages to capture the first few seconds before the scene erupts in chaos. A blinding light appears and an enormous object hovers above the house, pulling Abby and her family from her home. The officer calls on his radio for backup, his voice stuttering with shock from what he's seeing. The police quickly arrive at the scene and find a hysterical Abby. The sheriff demands Abby to tell him what happened, and in her sobbing state, she wails out that her daughter has been taken. A beam of light appeared on the ceiling and took Ashley away. Frustrated, the sheriff grabs a chair and breaks it into the mirror, demanding one more time to tell him where Ashley is, but Abby insists on her story. He doesn't believe this and declares that she is not of sound mind. He then takes Ronnie, her remaining child, from her custody. Abby screams and fights as she holds onto her son, but she is overpowered. She is then left defeated in the middle of the room, crying out for her missing daughter. As she calms down, Abby forms a plan. If she wants her back, she has to ask the creatures themselves. Abby then calls Dracampos and Drajasami for help. Dracampos is skeptical, but Abby insists that there is no other way to do this. Left with no choice, the group begins the hypnotherapy session on Abby. Drasmi holds the camera as Dracampos starts to put her in a trance. After the count of 1, Dracampos takes her back a few days before 8, when she was recording the dictation in her bedroom. As they try to recall the next event, Abby tells them about a now smiling and looking down at her. It's the same all her patients kept seeing. Her face contorts in horror as she realizes that it's not a no. Abby screams as the dark figures grab a hold of her body and drag her away from her bedroom. She starts hyperventilating on the couch, her mouth still screaming. As her mind flashes through the visions inside her head, she is standing alone, naked and cold in a room. A drilling device hovering behind her and then penetrating through her skin. Back at the Tyler residence, Dracampos and Drasmi can only stand in horror as they watch how his body shake, scream and levitate off the couch in a distorted tone. A second voice erupts from her body, telling them that it enforces its will. Abby manages to call out, asking them what they mean. The voice continues to scream out incoherent phrases as Abby begs the creatures to bring her daughter back. The voice screams out that they are never going to give Ashley back, and, in one sweeping tone, it declares before them as a god, Abby collapses back on the couch and convulses as Dracampos and Sammy try to calm her down. A couple of days later, Abby wakes up in the hospital and sees the sheriff and Dracampos. She insists that all three of them were abducted by the creatures. To help make sense of recent events, the sheriff recalls the painful memory of her husband's death. He reveals that, contrary to what Abby believed, Will actually shot himself in the head. It was a suicide and not murder. Ever since his death, Abby hasn't been able to cope with the painful truth. Abby denies this and still insists that something took her daughter. Several years later, Ashley is still missing and her only son Ronnie has grown apart from her, blaming her for everything that has gone wrong in his life. Up to this day, Abby still believes that Ashley was taken by non-human intelligence. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.